the biggest signal that somebody isn't trustworthy, that they say, trust me. You make yourself too vulnerable. You risk too much because you're trusting. The other one trusted him so much that it didn't think they needed a warning.
Isn't it absurd that it's so intrinsically part of us, but here we are in 2025, still trying to figure out what it is?
You need this trust as a skill, for sure, in your life, and you can't live without it.
There's a level of insanity that I've never quite understood with you academics, right? And the level of insanity kind of goes like this, right? You have children, okay? You research, you publish, you edit, you teach, and you also try and sleep a bit on the side as well, okay? So there's obviously a deep passion that draws you to what you do. I don't know how you do it. So I would like to know very much how you were led to the theme of trust. I'd like to know what you're doing with your life right now amidst that mayhem I just outlined earlier. And then we'll get into it. How does that sound?
So I started with this frustration that researchers on alliances and joint ventures were always pointing out that trust is important, but were not really researching that part. They were talking about strategy and about culture and everything. Yes, but this element of trust was like a, was always an ingredient, but nobody really looked into it. So it could have been something else at the time, but I just noticed it. And then, of course, when I got started on it, what I liked about it was that it was this, this surprising element really in business where you talk much more about control and about, not these soft topics like trust, but you talk really about hard topics about technology and finance and logistics and so on. And then somebody comes in and says, something like trust is important. That is initially still surprising, that trust doesn't seem to come from the world of business, the notion, right? But if then people in business and economics point out that it is actually quite important, then it's also an exciting extension of the field as a researcher. And there are so many connections to your own life, to real life. Everybody can imagine that trust matters, and that it is also hard to pin down how it matters and what it is. And so that is how I got drawn into understanding it ever better and really trying to also push myself and that it is more than risk-taking, push myself that it is more than just a vague notion of some sort of moral behavior or something, because the research that was there and people like Niklas Luhmann, who had also written about it a little bit more than just one paragraph, were onto some really cool ideas that I just wanted to understand and then develop myself further.
Doesn't it seem absurd to you on one level that, let's assume that you and I agree that we could not have got here with some level of trust, right? As human beings, right? So ever since we shuffled off the African continent, whatever, let's say 175,000 years ago, there are parts of our brain and our enteric nervous system which enabled us to cooperate, which enabled us to connect in such a way that we could be part of the conditions that out of which increasing complexity emerged, be it larger family circles or larger communities or systems, so on and so forth. So isn't it absurd that it's so intrinsically part of us, but here we are in 2025, still trying to figure out what it is? There seems to be a divide. I mean, in my mind, at least anyway. And if we talk about it in academic terms, I'm not presupposing that's what you do with your life. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to make a point here. But we seem to talk about it in these strict academic terms that need to be reliable and valid on one side. And then it's, out of this strict academic regime, we can therefore presume the authority to speak to HR or to strategy or to marketing or to sociologists or so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it is so intrinsically part of who we are, and it's something that we share with our children, our partners, our families, our friends, the stranger across the street. And there's this, we're either talking about this or that. And in doing that, we seem to we seem to lose the humanness of it, to my mind. Doesn't that seem absurd to you?
That's a very interesting observation, and the question of what we are losing when we're actually trying to theorize trust. And I mean, as a scientist, I would say yes, you always lose something when you theorize. It's really all of the kind of processes of life when you try to describe them in abstract terms and generalize. You always, yeah, it's the difference between concrete and abstract. The theory is never like real life. That would be one way of saying yes, you're right, but that doesn't stop us from doing science. But I think especially with the topic of trust is a bit more than that, because I quite admire Adam Seligman's approach to trust, and this was already in his earlier work. But a couple of years ago, he published another essay, and in which he talks a bit more specifically about the notion of embodied knowledge and trust being a matter of embodied knowledge. That means it is an experience that is hard to describe in words and to theorize in words, but it's also in that sense embodied in that we really need our bodies and not just our brains to feel trust and to be trusting and really to trust. So it is something that is more a matter of experience than a matter of cognition, and also then of just emotion. It's not also something that's not just so spontaneously that you just feel it and then you don't feel it anymore. It's really an experience, and it's connected to our bodies, and that is why it's so difficult to disconnect from our bodies into some written paper or a theory or a model. And that's why I think we've got quite excellent models that help us as heuristics, as also enabling us to speak about a trust problem if there is one in real life. So I think we've got some decent tools and ideas, but there's still this feeling that it's not all of it. It is kind of enough to deal with the problem, enough to talk about trust repair and what needs to be done and so on. We've got quite a lot there, so shouldn't think that we haven't figured it out. But it's maybe it's just like the universe and how it all started. Nobody knows that yet, and that's despite all the knowledge that astrophysicists have, and what they know about the universe today compared to 10 years ago, 100 years ago. It's quite amazing how much more we know now. But honestly, they have to admit they still don't know the most important part, which is how did it start? Like the last few milliseconds before the Big Bang, or whatever metaphor you want to use, they actually admit they haven't got a clue. I wanted to say something else, is that, we don't need a theory of trust in order to be able to trust. I mean, I shouldn't say that, because it kind of kills our business, doesn't it? When we start talking to people about how you trust, we can always say, you're actually already doing it more or less every day in some instances. You're aware that there's something going on like trust. In many, you're not. You're just, because it's taken for granted. It's a matter of the routines of daily life, and you're kind of doing it all the time. And so obviously it's not required to do it very cognitively. So what we can offer in practice then, and what you can offer with your concepts and your ideas that you are bringing to people, is to deal with the difficult situations, is to deal with those relationships where that we have to collaborate on, and where it doesn't come so naturally to trust everybody that is working on it, and where you have the more difficulties. And then with our concepts and with our academic understanding, maybe in some cases we can help to build trust where otherwise there would have been mistrust.
So on that note, we're going to go to the dark side of trust, right? Before we get there,
yes,
just perhaps some structure, just to shed some light on the frameworks I'm bringing this to me, so you can hold my hand through this conversation and you sort of, nudge me in the right direction. So I'm of the school, I think it's common sense that trust involves the willingness to be vulnerable based on expected behaviors. That vulnerability involves real harm, be it emotional or physical harm. Expected behaviors involve integrity, benevolence, and capabilities. So in other words, the degree to which I see those three aspects in Guido is the degree to which that emotional state of trust will emerge in me. So does that sound pretty much generally what the research is saying?
Well, you're basically summarizing using most established concepts in our field
Okay.
that there are. So I'm not going to say at all that you're on the wrong track, but the magic is not to label the boxes in the model, but to see how that really comes together in reality. And because for instance, the using the three trustworthiness categories, people in real life don't go around with a checkerboard and
Mm,
tick off certain categories and then they say I trust. It's much more um, interactive. It's much more a mix of cognition and emotion. And so, the moment I actively think about your ability, I have already got an opinion about that. You've already sent me
yeah.
so many signals, right? And then in the moment I start thinking about it, I don't actually also come to a final conclusion there. You may give me some extra additional cues to prove your ability. And then I might say, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe he actually knows how to do it. He didn't look like it, but he knows how to do it. Wow. And so this is already a matter of interaction, of experience. And this can be in direct personal interaction, but can also be with abstract information that I hear from others about the person. He's quite nice or whatever. So it is yes, this model that you outlined is quite useful, and still it is only a model, and the actual experience and why then people are sometimes willing to be vulnerable and then in a very similar situation they are not, is still
Yeah.
quite interesting. And it's still we still don't have this
Yeah.
full precision to predict when trust will happen. But I'm
Okay.
happy with the kind of
Yeah.
using these categories to at least make sense of
So,
what is going on.
let's
Yes.
say I've just taken some very blunt tools, okay, out of the toolbox and put them on the table, okay.
Yeah.
I also understand that it's nuanced. These signals come to us in many different ways,
Yeah.
and it's dynamic. Um, and let's call it the evidence or the impressions come to us either rationally, as you well know, or affectionately, of course. Okay. And then
Yeah.
let's say that the emotional state of trust then emerges. Now, before we get to the dark side of trust, when that emotional state of trust emerges in us, then what really can happen between you and me? What I mean, literally between you and me as an interpersonal relationship, and amongst teams, and between, for example, organizations and the people they serve, or governments and the people they serve, and also at a generalized level, what happens? Why are we in pursuit of this holy grail called trust?
Yeah. Yes, I mean what happens is basically cooperation. We're able to work together and to achieve something together that we wouldn't have achieved on our own. Quite simply, that is what trust enables. It means that we're actually entering into relationships that we may have otherwise not even started. That in those relationships we don't focus on the bad things that could happen and the controls that we need to implement to make sure they don't happen, which is going to take away a lot of our attention and energy if we have to do that. With trust, we can use that energy for something much more positive. And that means like trying to solve a
Mm,
problem together, for example. And for that, we need to contribute. We need to share information. We need to also share feedback, criticism, and ask questions. And this requires a level of openness to each other, um, and feeling safe in asking questions or providing information, which again without trust we wouldn't do. So if we don't have trust, if we don't share information and resources, then we are lacking the
mm,
things to solve our problems. Or we could solve the problems much faster and much better if we all contribute more because we trust each other. So I think why trust is so important is that it actually helps us to get to solutions that otherwise
yeah.
wouldn't be
Okay.
forthcoming.
And can we do that in an accelerated way when there's trust in the room?
Yes, I mean, yes, creative processes of problem solving will be much faster if people
Yeah,
are trusting each other. Um, but we will this will actually also be one of the points where we point
yeah,
point
yeah,
out dark sides in a moment. But first of all, trust is a catalyst, is a an accelerator of social processes of
yeah,
interaction and collaboration. It is also, I mean, another benefit from trusting is that it
yeah,
actually feels good. It's like we like to hear that people are trusting us. Again, there's a dark side to that as well, so let's wait for that. But generally speaking, initially, it's a a sign of recognition and appreciation if we are trusted, if we feel others trust us. That is a good feeling, and but that is maybe again our body's
yeah,
reward for us to do something that is actually
yeah,
helpful, useful for ourselves. So we're if we feel good about being trusted, then our body is trying to tell us,
yeah,
keep on doing that. That's great for you. And but there is
yeah,
an intrinsic reward, let's say, in being trusted, and also in feeling that somebody
yeah.
else is honoring your trust. So
So
just feels
just
good.
before we
Yeah.
get to the dark side of trust, when you say there's an intrinsic reward, are you talking about oxytocin and dopamine and all that type of thing?
Yeah. Well, I leave that to the neurobiologists, and that's not my field. But I'm also quite happy to accept that there are certain processes in our brains are
Yeah.
evident
Okay.
when we feel
So
trust.
how
Yes.
is it?
So
How dare you say there's a dark side to trust? What do you mean?
yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's predictable in anything, isn't it? There's always a dark side. So the literature pointing out the dark side of trust also emerged along with all this amazing literature that came out in, at least in organization and management studies, in the 1990s. So there was a big wave of new research, and already then some people said, like, look, there's potentially also dark side, and there are several ways of talking about that. One is, as I just maybe one that was also early on in the literature um, is quite connected to this intrinsic value of trusting. It feels good, and so it could actually be that people are overdoing it. And a sulfate of trust was one of the problems of trust that was mentioned quite early on in the literature, that there could be too much of a good thing, that you just um, you make yourself too vulnerable, you risk too much because you're trusting. So that that the literature suggests there is like an optimal level of trust. So trust is not the more the better, according to this research, but up to a certain point, trust is very helpful, and then there's this inflection point where you or where you actually gain less and less from trusting more, up to the point where you actually start to lose something if you trust even more. And that is because trust does ultimately maybe need to be combined with control. You shouldn't give up any sort of control, and you have to notice when the relationship isn't
Mm,
going well anymore, and then you have to be able to get out of that. And for some reasons that seems to be difficult. So too much trust, for example, could mean that the people who work together, they don't pay attention anymore if what they are doing is actually working, or if what the other is contributing is actually valuable. It could be that you stop criticizing each other because you're trusting each other so much,
yeah,
you're just not no longer scrutinizing what the other is doing. And so you're also losing this mechanism
yeah,
of correcting each other, like saying, look, be careful, right? So, and nobody tells the other to be careful anymore, and so one falls off the cliff because the other one trusted him so much that it didn't think they needed a warning. And these kinds of, so this could be negative effects of
yeah.
too much trust.
So the picture that's come to mind is one of a gradient and the other of control. So the gradient, to my mind, that is emerged listening to you speak is there's an optimal zone in which we trust. Then there's the second zone where the returns of trust begin to diminish. And then there's, broadly speaking, a third zone where it actually becomes detrimental to the relationship. So if you could speak to those sort of artificial zones that I created. And then secondly, you spoke about control, and you said that control is sometimes difficult. So what do both those concepts mean?
Well, I mean, the first of all, in terms of the kind of those levels of trust and the outcomes that you were talking about, of course, there's also the left hand side where you have too little trust, right? Where there's so little trust that you don't get much positive effect from that little trust. So the curve is really starts from a even negative outcomes because you're not trusting enough, then some somewhat positive outcomes because you're trusting a little bit, and then there's this part where you're trusting quite a lot, and where the relationship really takes off, and then the phases that you were mentioning. I think that is helpful to look at it in this way, and that you also could challenge a relationship every time, like, are we trusting too little or too much? So I think that is a valid question to always ask yourself. Well, maybe if we trusted a little bit more, we could achieve even more. Or maybe, hey, we have to be careful if we if we if we are giving up all the checks that we could have, then maybe we'll regret it because we're not even going to notice when things are going too bad. But I think we can talk. We can use this as an idea, but we have to remember that you can only tell afterwards. It will be like all of these life cycle or similar concepts, S-shaped things. You never know exactly where you are, because this is the difference between looking at the graph after the effect and saying, oh, that's where they went too far, or being on the trajectory yourself, like being really the bullet. and then maybe, yes, I mean, we can, if you imagine yourself, you're jumping into a swimming pool, yes, you kind of feel when you're start to go down again, right? but actually never. So this may also be the experience in a relationship like that, like when you're jumping, like, oh, now it's no longer rising, we're starting to fall, but it's not very precise and not very clear. So you're, especially, since we're not really jumping around and just talking about gravity, but we're talking about all kinds of effects in our businesses that might lead to an extension of a growth phase or a start of a decline, and it's so complex and difficult to tell in social relationships as well, that we never really know whether our current level of trust is optimal or not. We cannot really tell that usually in the process. We can tell later, or we can just compare the last few days, and then there may be these signals that we are losing our trust. We should try to rebuild it. We're overdoing it. Let's try and be more careful, but it's not going to be very precise. So the suggestion, like, of optimal trust as an almost mathematical concept, and in some papers it is presented as a mathematical formula, where people put in all the variables and say, like, this is how you can calculate the optimal level. It's not that precise. Sure, there are also the more obvious sides that you trust can always be disappointed. So the fact that, I mean, this is part of the definition of trust. If you refer to uncertainty, you may always be surprised. There's always a possibility that trust can be disappointed, and so this possibility of disappointment can always be seen as a negative element of trust. Then deception, that you may be deceived by other people, that they are trustworthy and they actually are not, like the con artists tricks, that they build trust with you first and then they ruthlessly exploit it. So this is the same disappointment risk, just exacerbated because people actually deliberately mislead you. It's not that there's some part something doesn't work out, but they actually want to harm you and they lead you to believe. Then there's this thing that there could be a strong trust between some actors, but they are using it for undesirable purposes, but to others. So there could be the externalities of a very good trust relationship
Yeah.
between criminals, right? So these criminals actually trust each other strongly, and that enables them to do their criminal deeds. And so a strong trust relationship in a group could reinforce some externalities for outsiders. So then for the outsiders, there's a dark side to the trust that
Yeah.
they maintain with each other. And then being part of such groups, and this is the last part, there may be something like unwanted trust. Uh, this really fantastic paper by Denise Skinner, Antoinette Weibel, and Graham Dietz, I think was still involved at the time, and I think 4 or so together. But they talked about the trust as a poisoned chalice, and this is the idea of unwanted trust, where you are maybe part of a group and somebody tells you that they're trusting them, that they're trusting you, and so they have very, very high expectations how you behave and about your loyalty, for example. And that may get too much, right? And but this is also toxic trust, by the way, that you tell somebody you trust them in order to make them do things they may not want to do. So again, my favorite example, I know it's very cliche here, is that in the mafia, the boss says, "Luigi, I trust you." And for Luigi, that's really bad news, right? I said earlier about how much we like to hear that somebody's trusting us. But in that context, it means if you don't do what I want, you probably die or something even more horrible. And so this kind of trust um, that is raising the expectations to a level that the other side cannot fulfill them anymore, or is spurious in a sense that it's not really meant. People just say it, and you cannot really count on it, but you also cannot openly reject it and say, I don't believe you, or you're just saying that, and so on. These are some forms of this unwanted trust, which is I think that is maybe also for the context, in the context where you're working, with companies or other organizations and clients and individuals, to inform them that trust is quite demanding too, or being trusted is quite can be quite a burden. And you have to, if you don't want to be disappointed, you have to also check if that burden is
Yeah.
okay for the other side. It's quite ridiculous to say you disappointed me if you force somebody to make promises they never wanted to make. So and this is, by the way, also one of the things that really currently interests me the most in trust research, apart from a better understanding of vulnerability that many of us are working on at the moment. I'm taking very much an interest in the question of why do people honor trust? Like what are the explanations and the conditions for why once we're given trust, we feel obliged to honor it, and how this obligation, where the obligation comes from, and also how it may happen that it could be too much, that the expectations that the responsibility essentially that you accept from being trusted, that
Yeah.
could be too much.
So if I've
Yes.
heard you correctly, there are 5 senses, or there are 5 ways in which trust can be dark. One is that it can hold back growth. Okay. I don't want to break trust by mentioning something that we could work on because it could be so offensive or so off-putting. Okay. Trust can be disappointed, which means I trust Guido with something, but he lets me down. And as a result, it will
Yeah.
have a negative effect on our relationship. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, and so you, for instance, in that case, you may regret it
Yeah.
later that you trusted somebody, and you say, like, now I've been disappointed. I wish
Yeah.
I had never trusted. But that thought is not helpful, because you probably, if you genuinely trusted, there was this doesn't come out of the blue, like unless you're like completely careless. But which is also, it's another interesting discussion recently, that trusting also means requires a
Yeah.
certain level of accountability. That you're not like trusting too lightly, or you can be accused of of trusting too lightly, and then if you're
Yeah.
disappointed, it was your own fault. But so it's a little bit more. It's just that, and again, so it's part of the concept of trust, that trust can be disappointed. From the point of view of the person that was disappointed, it's a dark,
Yeah. Yeah.
negative thing of trust. That we wish, ideally trust would be uh, never disappointed, would never be disappointed. And in a good relationship, it can be that trust is never disappointed, but it always includes the
Mm.
possibility of disappointment. If that is no longer there, if that is eliminated, then we don't need trust anymore. So it is built into trust that it can be disappointed, and that's why some people
Yeah.
may not like it, may also not like uh, the idea
Yeah.
that they need to rely on trust, because it's not
Yeah.
100% sure,
Mm.
right? But what is? Nothing is. But this is the smallest part, that it can be disappointed. The more significant part is that
Yeah.
you can really be deceived into an
Mm.
insincere trust relationship, where people are just waiting to betray you, and then just build up the trust, so that it's
Yeah.
like worth it, right?
So,
So
so let me
let's say,
categorize these. It's number one, trust is dark or can be dark in that it can hold back growth. Number one. Number two, it can disappoint the other or be disappointing rather. Number two, trust can also be
yeah,
deceiving. You can deceive someone with it, or it can deceive you about someone else. The fourth is that it can essentially be weaponized.
yeah,
It can be used for nefarious purposes.
yeah,
And also, fifthly, trust can be dark in that it can be unwanted trust. In other words, if Weirdo forces his trust on me for the purposes of manipulating me, that's unwanted trust. And if Weirdo was a gangster and he said, Dominic, I trust you.
yeah, yeah. And it could be, um it doesn't even have to be malevolent, that you really want to, um it can be a spiral of trust, that
Mm.
without bad intentions, but which just gets overburdened. It's like, you know loving someone so much that you put everything into it, and more than you can actually
Yeah.
realistically get out of it. I think unwanted trust, or trust as a burden that you put onto others, it's the tricky part is that you may not even do that intentionally, or realize that you are
Mm.
overburdening it.
In
I
the
mean,
workplace,
there,
for
yeah.
example, if someone is trusted to do too much and it pushes them sort of into the deep end beyond their capacity.
And because there
Yeah.
is, and again, sorry, but this, we're often talking about how is
Mm.
trust different from other things, right? You compare trusting with like a straight deal, like tit for tat. You give me this, I give you that. And then it's very transparent. Everybody knows what they're getting, what they're giving. You can compare if it's equal, if you can afford it or not. With trust, it's different. It's because it's open ended, much more open ended. You don't know what the bill is going to be if you enter into a trust relationship with someone, and then it's also not possible to reject the bill. Like in other situations, you can say, well, you're billing me more than we
Yeah.
agreed. Hey, look, we have a contract. I'm just telling you, this you sent me
Yeah.
another invoice, please, right? And in a trust relationship, you cannot do that. I mean, you're because you would be more or less, again, rejecting the whole relationship, maybe. And also because you don't have that list of things that you agreed to. And that's a good thing about a trust relationship, that it is open ended, and that we don't know yet how
Yeah.
far it's going to take us. But then when it goes too far, and you can't fulfill the expectations anymore,
Mm.
then it's also very hard to then simply say,
Mm.
this is where it ends, and I'm prepared to go this far, not further. This is actually what people should do, but they may not do it because they don't want to
How do
jeopardize
we
the whole
guard
relationship.
against the dark side of trust?
quite simply uh, by realizing that not addressing it is only making it worse. So I think the the trick could be to try and say it's exactly because we want to trust each other that we should also talk about negative potential negative effects or these dark sides that are there, and ask each other honestly if it's still okay for you like this. Um, is there anything we could do better? And if we ask that question, it doesn't mean that we think
Mm.
things are not good. I think that's in a business relationship as well as in a like personal private relationship. It's quite it's not common to do it, but it would be the really just stepping back from the relationship and looking at it and saying like, are we actually? I mean, are we happy, or isn't it really a sign of strong trust if we are able to look at this relationship and reflect on it and try and
Yeah.
see if there are dark sides. But I think though that in the same time we have to mention that people also forget to celebrate
Mm.
their trust relationships. So I think this was an impressive paper by Lukas Kasten that I always cite and remember in this respect, because he really used the word of behavioral trust as a celebration of a trusting relationship, where we also enjoy the fact that the relationship is going well. And so um, even I mean, even anniversaries or other rituals, if they are not too ritualistic, if they are just like occasions to stop and think like, look how great this relationship is,
Mm.
let's be happy about that. So I think this so as trust researchers, we often say that trust shouldn't be brought up unless there is a problem, right? So we shouldn't, and also we tend to say that if somebody says trust me, you shouldn't trust them, because that already kind of signals there's something not is not happening by itself. So
Mm.
there should
Mm.
be a problem, right? And if they say you can trust me, then it's probably even worse. That's like the biggest signal that
Yeah.
somebody isn't trustworthy, that they say trust me. And or you can trust me. And so this is how we commonly look at it. But I think there um, there are also reasons to say we should sometimes really become aware that we are in a trusting relationship, and signal to each other that
Mm.
we're really happy
Mm.
about that and enjoying it. And also, without any specific reason, sometimes just ask, is everything still okay for you? Is it are you happy? Is it
Yeah.
too much? Is it too little? Without suggesting that they need to say, oh yes, thanks for asking me, finally there's this one thing. If they then just say that, hey, yeah, sure, it's fine, don't worry, then don't dig, then just say,
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to be sure, right? And so these kind of quick checks, like, is this still okay for you? Is this too much?
Mm.
Is it too fast? And so on. This is quite good. And it sounds more like a romantic relationship developing, but it's also with like suppliers or
Yeah.
employees. You can do the same thing, and just
Yeah.
checking, just quick checking
What
in
is
if
the
everything's
most
okay.
what is the most
Yeah.
compelling thing going on in trust research right now?
Of course, it's AI, right? Sure, it has to be. Everything today is has to be looked at again because of the new possibilities. But I find that quite challenging. I think how AI generally affects social relationships, I think, is quite amazing. Um, and if AIs can be trusted and so on, this is all really interesting. And not just can the companies that are working on this be trusted, but really the models themselves. What is the point when they become actor like, and we have to think if there's actually a real trust relationship with a machine. And I've been in for instance in a seminar on automated care, I'd like to call it. So robots that take care of sick and elderly people, and there's really exciting research how the social relationships between machines and people are changing are really different now from maybe how we could talk about it some years ago, where you could also say like I trust my car, but now if you say I trust that robot, it's really a different thing, because a lot of they simulate social relationships quite well, and so that some philosophers would say like, well, the robot is simulating that they're trusting me or that they're trustworthy. All the human beings are also just simulating it, aren't they? How can I ever be sure, like, if the algorithm of Dominic is actually working well in terms of compared to the algorithm of that robot? And so I think, yes, our colleagues are doing amazing work in how algorithms and big data applications and machine learning affect social relationships, and with that also affect trust. So I think that is, if I would speak broadly for the field, that is, I think, the
Yeah.
biggest development at the moment, and where also a lot of research is published. The compelling for me is this point that some of us picked up a couple of years ago, that we still really don't understand what vulnerability means, and I think it is so essential to the trust concept that we need to work on it. And one of the compelling things coming out of that is that it's also the vulnerability of the person that is trusted, not just the trusting
Mm.
person. The trustor is vulnerable, but I
Yeah.
was alluding to that a little bit, that this kind of question of trust being compelling and honoring, I think there's a
Yeah.
mutual vulnerability in trust, and not everybody agrees that there's always a mutual vulnerability. They say there are some very one-sided trust relationships where the person being trusted is not really vulnerable at all. I don't think so. I think there's always also vulnerability is always a reciprocal. It may not be symmetrical, but it is reciprocal. So I think work on vulnerability and also what that means for the
Yeah.
trustee is, I think,
Yeah.
where we are going at the moment, including notions of like felt trust, which has often been challenged as a useful notion, but I think it's
Yeah.
pointing in the right direction of things that we need to study. But in terms of practice and research together, the AI
Mm.
developments are raising a lot of
Mm.
questions that trust researchers also
Okay,
need
so
to
in
answer.
closing, Guido and a stranger, right, walk into a bar. Guido doesn't know who this guy is, but the guy asks him sincerely, and he says, "Why is trust so incredibly important?" Now, you don't know who he is. You don't know if he's in the public space, in the private space. You don't know if he has a
Yeah.
family or not. But he's sincere in asking you, why is trust so important? What do you say to him?
It's because without it, we can't be human,
That's it. Beautiful.
right?
That's it.
That's it.
And the follow-up question would be, but why? Why can't I be human?
because because then we would deny that we need other
Mm.
people, and we would deny that we are vulnerable, and we would deny that we don't have a clue what's going
Mm.
on. And so I think coming back to the idea of trust as an experience, and it's something that's in our body, and it's our way of relating to the world, really, the social world in particular here. Um, yeah, I think if all trust got taken away, what was taken away from us, we would just freak out. I mean, like Luhmann said, we shouldn't even leave the house, or wouldn't probably even leave the house. We wouldn't be able to live, because living means exposing yourself, and with trust, it's okay to do that. Without,
Mm.
it's not. And so, in a radical sense, we really can't live a social life without trust, and that's why we need it. Um, Yeah, that's what I would tell the stranger. But I would then also say that doesn't mean that you should always trust everyone and everything in every sense. But you need this trust as a skill for sure in your life, and you can't live without it. But it doesn't mean that you need a strong level of trust with every person on the planet. Um, with some, you should be mistrusting because it's clear they want to hurt you. So you can give them a chance, you can give them a benefit of the doubt. But when it's so clear, then you also need distrust in your life. But although some of our colleagues doubt that they say that trust and distrust are really two different things. I think the skill of trusting is also a skill of distrusting and knowing when not to, and what to do when you can't trust. But yeah, so the stranger could also ask, like, okay, in which situations is it particularly important, or how do I know if I should invest more in a relationship, or if I should actually try and kind of say, okay, it's going well, that's enough. And that's again also a matter of experience, but then we already got the stranger to accept that he needs trust in general, and it's more a matter of how much
Yeah.
and how. Yeah.
If you don't mind, let me just run with that. What tips would you give him while you guys are sipping on your beer at the Oktoberfest? What tips would you give them, give this stranger with regards to who they should and shouldn't trust?
Who they should and shouldn't trust. Again, we're talking like very broadly here, very, it's, and I'm going to give a general answer, and it's not. I wouldn't tell them, well, take the ABI list and check the person out, and if they have enough points, you can trust them. I would I would I would say you can trust somebody if they signal to you credibly that they are very seriously interested in the relationship with you. That it is trust is about a relationship, and if somebody, I mean, I've already mentioned that we can be deceived and we can be, fooled to think somebody wants a relationship with us. But that is the ultimate test. If they're interested in an, a relationship, not just in an exchange, in a quick deal, but in a ongoing interaction, open-ended, like we don't know when it's going to end. That is that if they are signaling that to you, then you can trust them. And if they signal to you, and we could give a lot of examples from politics and international politics at the moment, people are clearly saying no longer interested in having a good relationship with you. I don't need you. These are people you shouldn't trust.
Guido, thank you.
So yeah, and okay, I give it to the ABI list that I think I'm more or less talking about benevolence here. Although benevolence seems to be a little bit one-sided. The trusted person is benevolent towards the trusting person. So if I trust you, then I think you want me to do well, or you're interested in my well-being. So that is, and I think in trust it's both sides. You are interested in our well-being. So it's a benevolence that is related to the relationship and not just to the one
Yeah.
person taking the risk. And in fact, if it's, yeah, so I think the seeing the value in the relationship and wanting us to do well together, that is the attitude
Yeah.
of trusting, and also of
Yeah.
people who can be trusted.
So Guido, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We eventually got it done.
Yes, well, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope it's going to be useful
Yeah.
to
All right.
whoever is going to
Thanks so
listen to
much.
it later on.
Well, there we go. We can wrap it there. I'm really grateful. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thanks.